Well, we are here and we're so grateful today. We are talking about the intersectionality of the transitioning veteran. And if you don't really know what that means, you will by the time we are done, because Ahmad is really fantastic at explaining it. He is a veteran. He will, share a lot of information. We're very excited. My name is Christina Clayton. I'm one of the co-directors of the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. Again, if you can answer the poll, we'll share the results in just a few. Just want to make sure people have a chance to do it. So we want to first start about acknowledging our land. We know that this is complex issue. We are in a virtual space, but being based in Seattle, the University of Washington acknowledged the Coast Salish peoples of this land that touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Squamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. We always want to mention this to be talking about honoring the spirit and heritage while working for justice in their communities. A lot of, really irreparable things have been done. And we just want to acknowledge that because we are living in a very, sacred space. So a couple other key things. We are recording this. We will have the slides. We can't offer CEUs, but we just want to share this. And if you haven't heard of the Native Land website, we'll put that in the chat. It's a really great way to learn about the stewards of your land. Okay, on to the next thing. If you haven't heard of the Mental Health Technology Network, Transfer Network, it's a nationwide network that is supported by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, otherwise known as SAMHSA. We have 10 regional centers, a National American Indian Alaska Native Center, a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office. And there are also networks just like this for the addiction field and prevention field using the same structure. So our goal is to support resource development and offer trainings, training and technical assistance, workforce development for the mental health field. We cover Region 10, which includes Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington. But as you may be, not from there because we're virtual. So we reach a lot of people, and it's really great to have everyone here today. A little bit more about our Northwest Center. So our goals are to accelerate the adoption and implementation of evidence-based practices, heighten the knowledge, awareness, and skills of the workforce, foster diverse alliances, and address training needs of our partners, and then ensure availability and delivery of free training like this for you today. Our focus at the center, we are based in the University of Washington in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, and our area of focus from the faculty expertise is evidence-based practices for psychosis. However, we provide training on a lot of different topics like today, which we want to always uplift various voices in integrated care, suicide prevention, diversity and equity issues, school mental health, peer support, trauma-informed approaches, and others. And I'm very grateful that our wonderful team colleague, Gabrielle, knows Ahmad, and so was able to bring you for our session today. And I'm very, very excited about it. So we do things in a variety of ways. Free trainings like this, we record these. We do online courses that you can take whenever you like, learning communities, newsletters, resource library, and such. So Gabriel, I think maybe let's see what the results are of the poll. So we are very curious to ask, do you currently serve veterans? And over a quarter of you do. Let's see, the rating scale, excuse me. So 1/4 of you, maybe it's not as much, and then some, a lot. And then what are the roles that describe you? So 17% of you have served, and behavioral health clinician, case manager, outreach worker. What's your workplace setting? So you can close this out whenever you like. It's just helpful for us and the speaker to see kind of who's in the audience today. And we know there's a lot of others, and feel free to put those in the chat box. All right. We know that one of our goals as the network is to use, affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all the work we're involved in. And we want to be mindful there are a lot of different perspectives that are always going to be on these kind of events. We just ask everyone to communicate in a way that's respectful and inclusive and accepting of all the different cultures, genders, abilities, and experiences. Few logistics. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. You're muted and off camera because it's being recorded, and we're using this for a product, so you'll be able to view it later or share it with your colleagues. You can use the closed captioning. We'll share the video, a recording and slides, and how to obtain a certificate of attendance in a few weeks. For today, please use the chat for hellos, greetings if you are prompted to by Ahmad or one of us, or if you have a comment or a question around, tech stuff. If you have a question for Ahmad, please do use the Q&A button and post those there. And so I know he said he would like to get some things answered along the way if they're relevant to what he's talking about. So I'll be looking for those. I can't copy and paste it from the chat for some reason, but we'll be monitoring those. And so please feel free to throw those in at any time. Lastly, your feedback is really crucial to our work. And so we are asked and required by SAMHSA to do a short survey at the end of these kind of events, but we actually look at them very carefully, and they're anonymized. We don't see your names or anything like that, but it really helps the speakers. It helps us as planning the training plan each year. And if you want to see something similar or more like this in the future. So we appreciate your feedback, and it helps it keep the free training coming. So today's presenter, now to the good stuff. So Ahmad, and I apologize. It's supposed to be 2 T's. We fixed it in the one place and not this place. I apologize. We'll fix that before we post them. But Ahmad Bennett is a licensed marriage and family therapist associate and certified mental health professional for Washington State. Ahmad completed his internship with Valley City's Behavioral Health. After graduation, he began working with Seattle Counseling Services until their closure. And then he entered private practice and founded Crossroads Family Therapy in 2022. He graduated from Antioch University, Seattle with his Master's of Arts in Marriage and Family Therapy. And he focuses on providing individual, couple, and family therapy for communities of color, first responders, and veterans. Ahmad is also an adjunct instructor at Antioch University, Seattle, and teaches a sexuality and healthy relationships course. He is a medically retired Navy veteran and has worked in veteran-focused social services for over a decade, including work at Lake Washington Institute of Technology for 5 years as their veteran coordinator. And Ahmad specialized in housing, insecurity, employment services, and veteran transition services. I couldn't think of a better person to come speak with us today, so thank you so much, Ahmad. You want to say hi before we do a word cloud?
Yes. Sorry, let me just say hello to everyone, and I really appreciate that intro. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. So can I start sharing my screen and just kind of dig into
One more. Okay. Sorry, we have one more. And you know what I realized? Thank you. Gabriel is putting in the chat a word cloud, and it's not completely showing on my screen. Oh, there it is. So we would love for everyone, we're always trying to make these virtual events more engaging. But if you could just put in, what does serving veterans look like for you, or how, what does that mean for you? And it might take a minute, but you can click on the link and it should show up here in our word cloud, and then we'll turn it over to you, Ahmad. So anything that comes to mind about serving veterans, or maybe even a question. So let's see, I'm going to try. It might take a minute before it shows up here. I put something in. I wonder how long it'll take. We were having a little technical difficulty with it before. So if it's not working, I apologize. You can also just put it in the chat because, we don't want to waste time waiting for this thing to work. I'm so sorry. So I'll stop sharing, but, if people want to just put in the chat, what does serving veterans look like for you or mean to you? So I think that would really be powerful. So feel free to keep doing that. I'll turn it over to you, Ahmad, and you can start sharing screen, and I'll just be here waiting, queuing up questions as people have them.
Okay. All right, everyone. Hello. My name is Ahmad Bennett. Just kind of let you know my setup in my office here. I have a separate screen to my right, so I'm going to be staring that way, so you get to see this side of me. And I do a lot of telemental health, so pretty much that's all I do is telemental health. I'm really about making eye contact with my audience, but in this case, I'm going to be distracted. So I'm going to, hopefully everyone can see. Presentation mode.
There we go. Perfect. Yep.
You got it? Okay. All right, so here we go. Before I get started, I just want to express a heartfelt welcome to everyone that's here today. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy days and schedules on a Tuesday. I also want to extend a thanks to the University of Washington Northwest Medical Mental Health Technology Transfer Center for allowing me to do something like this, just to even be present. And a personal thanks to Gabrielle Orsi, Christina Clayton, and Kristen Hyatt, just for, again, helping me get here and set this up. Just like in the introduction, my name is Ahmad Hassan Bennett. I'm a marriage and family therapist associate here in Washington State. I did 10 years in the military, and I'm a original resident of the East Coast. Baltimore to New York area is where I'm geographically from. So today we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about veteran intersectionality. When I say that, what does that mean? So if anyone has any questions, I'm going to have some slides that specifically want to have intentional discussions. But if someone has any questions, raise your hand and just, shout out. Here we go. So what does it mean when I talk about veteran intersectionality? So if we want to use my clinical language, I can say I'm talking about establishing social connectedness and integration into dominant society. Some veterans may first need to reconnect, discover, and navigate their cultural identities from multiple perspectives. That's clinical speak. What I actually mean is how do we help transition veterans to connect with their post-military identity so they can establish new communities and discover new opportunities? So how do we help veterans rediscover who they are if they've never been a person of color as a civilian in the civilian space, or maybe part of the LGBTQ community? We've done it in the military, but this is the first time I had to be an adult in the civilian space. It's kind of what I want you to start thinking about a little bit. So to flush that out, first we're going to talk about, well, what's a veteran? There's many definitions of veterans. I'm going to talk about some of the standard ones. When we talk about veterans transition, if you're not familiar working with the veteran community, when you hear a veteran needs to transition, what are we talking about? Identity. How many identities do we have? How many identities do we possess? And where do these identities intersect? And then, of course, cognitive expectations. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about where we're at in the military cognitively and where we're at when we get out of the military cognitively, on average. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule. And then what's in your veteran support toolbox? What kind of tools are we adding to show up and serve veterans? So that's kind of where I'm going to be coming from. As I'm talking about this, so here we go. So as I'm talking about this, I'm going to use myself as an example. I'm not going to talk about any of my clients. The bottom ship on the lower left-hand is the lower left-hand corner is USS Abraham Lincoln. That's the very first ship I served on. I joined in 1994. I joined at 17 years of age. I was a radar operator, working command and control systems, weapon systems. In the top left-hand corner, I'm on board the USS Shoup. I'm a plank owner of a guided missile destroyer, DDG-86. I shot missile systems for a living. I'm in my 20s at this point. My career is moving pretty decent. So when we talk about all these different aspects of veterans transition, I'm going to be talking about it from a person of color perspective. Maybe we can think about yourself or someone else that you may be close to on what that experience may look like. So I was in Operation Vigilant Sentinel, Operation Southern Watch. I did many counter-terrorist and drug operations in South America, operated multiple weapon systems, and I was medically retired at 27 years of age. I was a member of our ship's VBSS team, which is Visit, Forge, Search, and Seizure team. I had a medical emergency, took out my left leg. I had to get retrained, and unfortunately, the Navy said I was no longer fit for sea service, and I took a retirement instead of picking another job that I probably wouldn't have enjoyed. So that's my story. So I want you to think about from that background as we start navigating some of these conversational topics. So what's a veteran? So if I were to ask the VA or the Department of Defense what a veteran is, for some of you may know, it's a minimum service requirement of 24 months or 2 years to be considered a veteran. If the service member becomes disabled because of their time in service, there is no minimum length of service to qualify for VA benefits. So that's from a benefits perspective what a veteran is. If you were to ask somebody who did not serve in combat, hey, are you a veteran? They might say no. They might say, well, no, I didn't serve in combat, so I'm not a veteran. So again, that's an identity that we're going to be talking about. And it just starts off like, how do we even classify ourselves? So some norms with veteran culture that I've realized working with a lot of different clients from the social service space or in the mental health space, there's some reoccurring norms that keep showing up. One of which is asking for help. That's probably the number one setback or troubling setback that shows up for veterans is to being able to be vulnerable with others is not a thing we do in the military. It's not because we don't want to be. It's just the job doesn't require it. My personal emotions and feelings doesn't matter for much here in this particular space. I'm going to show up, do my job, give 110%, not complain, right? So a lot of veteran norms that we hear is that in the civilian sector, a lot of folks identify with the job that they do, but in the military, it's really specific to our MOS or to our rank, or until the actual job that we're assigned to. Someone could say, I'm in the Army, but I'm a soldier. That hits different. Or if you're in the Navy and you say, I'm a Navy SEAL or I'm part of EOD, that's a different identity separate to the Navy, but it's very special. When people talk about that, we know exactly what they mean. For both military members and their families, military life provides a great sense of community and distinctly structured expectations and rules and guidelines. For all of us that have served, we get out of the military with an expectation of a process that's going to make sense. When we go to our first civilian job, we have these expectations of these processes that are already in place. So when we're going to hit the ground running, would it be really great at our job? How many of us actually can say when we got to our first civilian job, it made sense? I know I couldn't. When I first got there, I was very uncomfortable because nothing was making sense. Nothing was written down. I got 5 different answers from 12 different people on a process. It was driving me kind of crazy. It was making me my anxiety go through the roof because I didn't know how to show up and what stance I needed to take to be present in whatever job I was doing. Common mindsets in the military, we never assume, particularly in a combat situation and working in the civilian world. Sometimes I felt the whole workday was nothing but an assumption. Nobody seemed to be really connected on what was going on, but somehow I still had to show up and do my job. So some other norms. Expressing any kind of psychological needs or asking for help, especially when it comes to internal issues, those invisible wounds. We'll talk about those later. For veterans, that's something that we don't know how to do well. I was never taught how to ask for help when something was hurting on the inside. I was actually kind of made fun of in certain spaces if I were to say I was feeling a certain kind of way. So stepping out of the military and having an opportunity to actually reconnect with other people requires sometimes to be vulnerable. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to be vulnerable with my spouse, my family, or my kids. That's something that veterans don't always know how to do, and they have to relearn that. Fear of expressing emotional reaction, get confronted with suck it up or get over it. Kind of mentioned that already. We get kind of beat down while on active duty in certain situations when we're having certain feelings or emotions. The team is only strongest or weakest link is what I always would hear. So if there's any perception that I was that weak link, that I needed special attention, that was a negative feeling, a negative stereotype within my unit or division where I didn't want to be associated with someone that needed help or someone that was feeling a certain kind of way. So when getting out, I can't speak for everyone else who was in the military, but when I got out, I struggled even to articulate, to form the words, I need help. I didn't know how to do that. The command climate. I can't speak to what command climate. So a command, for those who haven't served, a command is the ship, the base, the unit that you belong to. We call those commands. So the command climate, really that tone is set by the commanding officer. He, she, or they will by directly or indirectly will set the rules on how everything is going to govern within that command, aka that unit, base, in my case, ship. So the command climate has a lot of control on how perceptions and how things are going to happen within that military system and setup and structure. If that command climate is broken from the top, it's probably to be broken at the bottom too. So the command climate sets the tone. I can't speak in 2022 what the tone is for command climates, but back in 2005, at the beginning of OIF, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and the Operation Enduring Freedom, the command climate that I was at is we don't want to hear about your personal problems. Your wife and your kids did not come in your sea bag, is what I would hear. So the command climate wasn't really open to expressing any extra need or care that required me to be really personal and in touch with my emotions. That was not an option. And I can't see any questions or anything. So if anyone has any questions or needs the raising of the hands, I can't see anything. So please let me know.
We are good, I think, right now.
Excellent. Thank you. So talking about veteran statuses. So if you're working with veterans, you're not familiar working with veterans, you all automatically assume everyone who gets out of the military gets treated the same. They don't. We have different qualifications and statuses of veterans. So we have a disabled veteran, such as myself. That really is going to determine my level of access to healthcare benefits, compensation benefits, in some cases, even financial benefits, depending on what we're talking about. So there's a hierarchy and tiered system to how the VA is going to serve veterans with particular needs. And that's really the disability or the compensation process is one of the ways that the VA does that. And I'm not going to read the slide to you. I'm hoping you can see these slides, you can read them. But you have a disabled vet, you have a VA rating system that goes from 0% to 100%. I'm not even going to explain to you about VA math. If someone out there in the audience can explain to me how VA math works, I would love to hear it. But yes, typically this means a disabled veteran may get priority with certain healthcare needs, medical needs, etc. Recently separated veterans. What does that mean? This is just like it sounds, someone who gets out of the military within a certain time period. Why is that important? When you get out of the military, when you have a certain window, to apply for certain things or to get certain services such as insurances or life insurance, I think is the one off the top of my head, and some other things that you can access. But you only have a certain window to get some of these things going as a recently separated veteran. Active duty, wartime, or campaign badge veteran. I am a campaign badge veteran. I have a Southwest Asia campaign ribbon with a bronze star. So what does that necessarily mean? That signifies that you participate in some specific operations. Again, this may affect your ability to apply for certain disability compensations, depending on your status, depending on what you're applying for. And then, of course, our Armed Forces Service Medal veteran, these are all military members who join in the military during a time of war or during an active military campaign. I think that's the McDonald's ribbon, as we used to call it. These are just different statuses of veterans that can apply for certain benefits. And really just applying for certain services and state services as well. So as a provider, you may want to know what type of veteran that's sitting in front of you, he, she, or they may need some assistance, and we can talk about what that looks like. But if you're unfamiliar and you just assume all veterans are created equal, well, here's an opportunity that you might be able to ask some follow-up questions with that veteran to make sure that they're connected to a VSO, a veteran service officer, that they actually have the opportunity to file a disability claim or an appeal with the VA. So just being aware of the veteran status can really help you pivot to how you can show up and support that veteran. So when we talk about the VA and what they do in the Department of Defense has several programs that they've created. TAPS class is one, Transitional Assistance Program. So these are the services on the left of the screen is what they do. So you're going to get pre-separation counseling. So typically when an active duty member is about to separate, you have an opportunity to take terminal leave. Well, some of you, hopefully, got an opportunity to take terminal leave. So you can figure out, okay, what do I need to do to kind of start staging and gearing up for me to actually separate from the military? Am I moving back to my record of origin? Am I going back home where I joined the military at? Am I going to stay where I'm at? Am I going to go someplace else? This is the kind of stuff hopefully you'll be working with in that pre-separation counseling, is determining where you're going to go, what the game plan is going to be, and what you're going to need. Educational assistant benefits. So when you're going through the TAPS process, you're going to learn about what kind of benefits you're eligible for. You're going to learn about disability compensation, how to file for those disability claims. Voc Rehab, Chapter 31 military benefits. If you have a disability of 30% or more, you're eligible for Chapter 31 Voc Rehab. What does that look like? Job placement assistance for service members, veterans, and spouses. So the TAPS class is going to help you set up a resume, maybe set up a LinkedIn profile, maybe scrub our social media profile to make sure it's employable. Relocation services. They're gonna help you figure out if how you're gonna get to where you need to go for your home of record. Medical benefits and education and career counseling. So that's the services the TAPS or ATAPS, the Army has the Army Transitional Assistance Program, is going to be providing. The mission, on average, approximately 200,000 service members transition from the military every year. I'm sure that number varies, but depending on what's going on. Part of that mission is helping that veteran, he, she, or they, reconnect with the family, enter the workforce, or figure out what benefits I need to get going and hit the ground running so I have a good start. So these are basically the standard services that you would expect a veteran to receive, or an active duty member, then veteran, to receive in that transition process. Notice all of these services that we're seeing are external engagement and services. Not one of these do I see a mental health transition. Do we do a PHQ-7 or a GAD-9? Are we checking for anxiety and depression, all that kind of stuff? We're not doing that. TAPS class that's not what they're doing. We're talking about external factors that's going to impact that veteran and their family. Washington State, I ran some numbers. Washington State right now has about 551,512 veterans in the state of Washington right now. And a lot of those veterans, when they were separating from service, had to go through this process. I know I went through it myself. So I'm going to be talking about a study. I was really curious when veterans were getting out of the military, when I was doing, preparing for this talk. I found some studies because, I'm all about that empirical data. I got to do it now. So I found a study, the 2019 edition of the Journal of Veteran Studies by McCormick et al. Did a qualitative analysis study of about 50 veterans in the state of Alabama that were currently going through the TAPS process that we just talked about. And they were looking for interpersonal themes. So what matters to this individual as they're transitioning? So we talked about the VA and their external needs, job, education, employment. We got that. We hear about all that good stuff. But what are the themes that really matter to the veterans? And so this is what it came up with. So one of the first things that came up, individual character. So when they asked these veterans, what individual character means to them, the response was honor, pride, being part of a team. Having that individuality in that military space is what that meant to them. Having pride in my work, always working hard, showing up on time, doing all those things that we expect for military members to do actually matter. And also, that individual part of that individual character, some of the veterans talked about mission first and overcoming adversity. How in the midst of suffering, prioritize the mission over self. So they're always prioritizing the team over self, the mission over self, the command over self, the unit, etc. So it's never about you. It's always about how you can show up for the group and what I can do to make that group experience better. It's a major individual character, interpersonal character of veterans separating out of the military. Relational character. So when we talk about relational character, we're talking about when veterans were saying, hey, camaraderie is really important. There's people to this day right now I probably talk to once a year, if we're lucky, because they live in different parts of the world, different parts of the country. But when we pick back up, it's like OS2 Bennet is back in the shop again, and we're coking and joking and having a good time. So relational character, having a single theme of camaraderie. A lot of veterans say that they were taught nothing about race. Everybody is related. Everyone is your brother or sister, because you never know who's going to show up and save your life. I will say this about the military. I'm not going to say they do a good job about doing this, but I will say this. I really feel the military is always the tip of any kind of major social change within this country, and that's my opinion. But when you think about integration of African-American troops from World War I and World War II, and then some of the social changes that have to come along with it, when we talk about women in the military and some of the social changes that have to come along with it, the military is one of the few organizations that encompass every orientation, every gender, every ethnicity, every race. Not saying everybody's going to get along. Never once did I say that. But I'm saying good, bad, and indifferent. The military does encompass all these different aspects and intersectionality of the country, of its citizens, showing up. So that's a big deal. So when you come into the military, you shed that identity because now that's being replaced by the U.S. Navy. You know, once a Marine, always a Marine, the Army, etc. You shed that individual identity, black, white, gay, straight, it doesn't matter. You're a soldier or a sailor or an airman or a Space Force person. I don't know what they call the Space Force. Somebody can help me out maybe in the chat. What do they call Space Force folks? So that's the identity that you're going to take on. And so that relational character is what they mean. We're thick as thieves. We're going to show up for each other because we're always going to support each other. It doesn't matter what we look like. We all wear the same uniform. Whoops. I don't know how I did that. Hold on. I got to go back. I went too fast. Okay. Systemic character. So systemic character, when they're asked about what systemic character meant to them, so themes describing organizational facets within military culture. Order, structure, training was a very common theme in this culture. Just the military way of doing things, from the uniform to the core values that each service has with their own traditions, language, heritage. It's the way they do things. This is very particular with interpersonal themes. We have to be mindful of generational differences. I'm Gen X, so I joined the Navy in 1994. How I see things and say things is a lot different than maybe a millennial who's separating from service, or Gen Z. I don't know, Gen Z can do that now? Yeah, I guess they're old now. Gen Z can separate from service right now versus someone who served in, like my uncles who served in Vietnam and Korea. Their systemic systemic characteristics is very different generationally. So you have to kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Every generation, not all veterans are created equal. So every mindset, every experience is going to be very regimental to, again, their identity, right? Betrayals. So another theme that was a reoccurring theme in this study is being betrayed. A lot of veterans felt that they've described that they've been betrayed by their government, military leadership, and society during their military service. Now, again, that betrayal is going to vary depending who we're talking to and which generation and what's happening in the world at the time. Excuse me. I know during my military service was, we're doing the Gulf War, Persian Gulf War. So the only betrayals that I could see is like, we got to stay on station. And that wasn't how it was, explained at the beginning of this deployment. I learned about deployments and expectations during that deployment, but that was the only betrayal I could come up with at that earliest time. But a lot of veterans, especially if you talk to these Operation Enduring Freedom veterans who served in Afghanistan, and ask them about what their thoughts are about how we ended it, they're going to vary and they're going to be pointed. So understand that a lot of veterans, even though we love to serve, we're going to serve, we're going to do what we're going to do, we keep receipts. We remember who showed up. We were going to remember who did what as well. So another reoccurring theme, no conflict. This theme was identified that captured how veterans might not perceive any betrayals or transgressions from the military service. Just like I said, betrayals, and some veterans have a lot to say about betrayals. You're going to have some veterans who have nothing to say and said, hey, it was a great time. I never had a problem. There was nothing ever wrong. That was my military experience. I don't understand when veterans complain. I don't get it, blah, 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 blah. There might be a lot of different reasons why someone might have a difference of opinion of their military service. It could be where they're at, what branch, what they look like. A lot of things could determine that. So not all, again, this is to reinforce that theme that not all veterans are created equal or are created the same, right? So transgressions. So there's two themes associated with this qualitative assessment that was performed that they discovered. The two themes that came up were internal conflict of killing and incongruent behavior versus how they're going to deal with any kind of transgression. Especially I'm talking about mindfully our combat soldiers, how they had to show up and how they had to make killing okay. They had to do what they had to do. So there's a conflict that was reported by a lot of veterans, how they had to do their job and protect themselves, their team, and come home, and how that goes against their values, what they were raised with. So a lot of veterans might perceive these violations of values violations of values or beliefs while they're in the military. They had to do what they had to do, and unfortunately, they might have to talk about that, unpack that later. Transgressions are real. A lot of veterans had to do things because they needed to, because the mission required it, the job required it, or their survival may have required it. So how do we help as clinicians or supporters of veterans? How do we help those veterans find grace for themselves? It basically is I want to plant that seed. How do we help those veterans who had to do those things find grace? Personal struggles, another one. How veterans can experience struggles if they reintegrate into society. So there's a prolific theme that civilians have different values and characteristics and just overall character that is so different from the military. And I guess depending where you work and what kind of field you work in, that may be true. Taking myself, for example, I've done everything from I worked for Comcast, I was a cable installer, I was a manager of a GameStop. I worked on aircraft up there in Painfield and Everett. I've sold vacuums. I was a project manager in corporate America for 6 years. I've done everything. Really, I was just trying to find purpose. I needed to eat. I needed a job. I kind of have a mindset. If you can teach me how to do something, I'll do it. So a lot of personal struggles coming into these spaces. What really killed it for me and doing all these different jobs, all different work, the work was the work. I could do that. It was trying to understand civilians. When I got out of the military, my boundaries were very weak for myself, and my expectations weren't there. And my communication style probably wasn't the best either. So helping a veteran understand what those expectations are in the civilian space will be very helpful. When you're working with a veteran, he, she, or they are going to have expectations based off their experience. There's going to be process, there's going to be structure, there's going to be quantifiable measurements that I'm going to be graded against. That's the world we lived in. But when we go to a place, and I don't want to throw any of my former, employers under the bus, but let's say we go to ABC Construction, and there's no rhyme or reason why we do things. Everything's chaotic. Everything's, last minute. Everybody's stressed out. There's a lot of behaviors that are happening at work that probably aren't safe or friendly or supportive. That veteran may struggle in that space. Versus they go to a very structured environment. Let's say they go to 1, 2, 3 construction. It's very safety oriented. We have morning meetings every day, so everybody knows what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, how they're going to do it. That might help that veteran, that individual, transition into a space so they can start finding their identity because they recognize some milestones or some landmarks in this new workspace that they recognize to help them adjust. So personal growth or continuity of military culture. That may vary from person to person depending on their military experience. Some individuals may want to completely data dump and wipe that military experience away from their heads. Others, I'll always be a veteran. I always live by their standards as much as I possibly can. It will never change. There's certain aspects of the military I still carry with me. There's certain parts of that journey. I get kind of crunchy when I'm late to things. I don't like being late. I am typically the first one in, the last one to leave. For some jobs, that really helped me. For other jobs, that really hurt me. It really isolated me from my teams, and depending on the work that I was doing, I felt alone because I was mission oriented. I wasn't thinking about profit and loss. I just want to get the job done. So understanding how our identities, if we're going to find our identity, we need to resolve the fact that yes, I am a sailor. I always will be a sailor, but that's not who I am anymore. There's different facets of my identity. That includes being a sailor. I'm a person of color. I'm a father. I'm a gamer. I'm a nerd. I love sports. I'm a fan, sports fan. There's so many different parts of my identity that I can connect with that allows me to connect with others. But if I I'm a veteran, that's all I'm ever going to do, we're really limiting our ability or that veteran for their ability to grow and to become more than just that Marine. Yes, once a Marine, always a Marine, but now you're a Marine dad, or now you're a Marine fill in the blank, right? So a lot of veterans will carry on expectations. They'll carry on certain patterns and behaviors. If you're a veteran in this and you're sitting in this webinar, what are some of the things that you still hold on to? What are some of the traditions or processes that you still hold on to, that are still working for you? I would love to hear those. Limited help. This is a reoccurring theme that I definitely see in therapy on a regular basis with the several veterans that I work with. Isolation is real. COVID even brought it, like made isolation, like, I'm glad in a way that COVID kind of happened with that regards, that it shed a light on how many people are isolated, how many people are stuck, how many people can't connect, or they can only connect online, but trying to meet up in person is a struggle, right? So, limited help sources. I don't have anyone outside of the people that I knew over here that I can speak with, because they won't understand what I went through, or they'll just worry too much. So you don't want that burden to be put on them as well. A lot of veterans think that there's no one that can understand their journey and their experience. You got to let them know that especially if you're not a military person or affiliated with a military culture, that you're their new battle buddy. You're going to get their six. You're gonna ride shotgun. Make sure you're using terminology and language that shows that I am committed to being with you, just being present. I may not be able to fix anything for you. I may not be able to protect you from everything, but at least I am here. You will not handle this journey alone. So that's one thing we have to let our veterans know, as providers, supporters, clinicians, that they're not alone. That whatever's happening to them is going to happen to you too. We have to reinstitute that idea that we're going to handle this together. We're going to go through this together. A lot of veterans, again, are still finding the language to be vulnerable. That might be a lot of why they have limited help resources, because they weren't allowed to have all the feels. They weren't allowed to have certain thoughts or feelings, or whatever's going on for them, and express those and expect to be supported, or not shoot yourself in the foot, or torpedo your career because you acknowledge to someone you have PTSD. Right? So we have to help our veterans find that language to articulate, to be vulnerable again. So this is a lot of data I'm throwing at you, but I just wanted you to see the different clusters between 1, 2, 3, and 4 of what kind of questions they were being asked in this study. But then I also want to highlight something else. Well, look who they asked. Nothing wrong being, of the Caucasian persuasion, that's fine. But do you think these answers would be different to these standard questions if someone was a person of color, a woman, or part of a different community like the LGBT community? I don't know. So I just want to throw that out there. As you're exploring and doing research, looking for information on how to serve veterans, and you're looking for research, be mindful of research bias. It's out there. So you want to make sure that any study that you're looking at, and this is, grad school 101 stuff, but any kind of study that you're looking at, you want to make sure that it's representative of the communities that you want to work with, or you just kind of, it's touching a little bit of everything. It's just not very one-sided. So this study was great. The information I think we got out of it was great. However, they only asked one group of people. So just want to throw that out there. So cognitive expectations. So when I'm talking about cognitive expectations, I'm talking about what is the brain capable of doing? What is the body capable of doing at this age? So the average enlistment age for any kind of military service will range between 17 and 21, give or take. I joined at 17, which required I needed my parents' permission. I graduated high school a little early. I needed my parents' permission. I was an adolescent, a teenager. I couldn't even vote. I couldn't drive. I couldn't buy a pack of cigarettes, but I could join my country's military and do some serious damage with stuff. Cognitively, where do you think a 17, 18, 19-year-old person is? So physically, I kind of came into my body at this point. I don't think I'm going to be growing, physically any taller or larger at this point. Not so, and again, these are our guidelines. This isn't the gospel. Not everyone is in the same bucket here, but these are some generalities I wanted to share with you. Adult bodies not always prepared entirely for adulthood. Ain't that the truth? I look like an adult. I even sounded like an adult, but I was thinking like a kid still. I can say that about myself, no one else. So I presented like I knew what I was doing, but internally, I was just a kid. Socially, they value committed relationships. You bet I did. That's all I thought about, really, is the relationships that I formed outside of my home. Because why? My home was a hot mess. And that's why I was looking at the military to get me out of this hot mess. So socially, I really valued relationships. I didn't understand them. I didn't understand healthy relationships. That's a conversation for a different day. Looking for more adult social settings. Yes, I'm trying to be an adult. What's more adult than wearing these dress blues and learning how to smoke cigarettes, right? I want to make my own decisions. I joined the Navy. That was about the only decision I ever made because after all that, everybody told me what to do after that. So that's about the only decision I made. Everyone else was like, okay, Mr. Bennett, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. They want support from adults, but only in guidance. Ain't that the truth? And for me, I didn't even really want support. I just want acknowledgement that I'm an adult and I'm a human being doing my own thing. So I want you to think about the identity of a 17-year-old kid who was growing up in Eastern Shore, Maryland, Salisbury, Maryland at the time, didn't know what he didn't know. And he's joining the military to get away from home, to go see the world, which I did, and to have a lot more adult experiences, which I did, because I was growing up in a very unhealthy, dysfunctional family system. And I just didn't know what I didn't know. I needed to get out of Maryland so I can find my own identity, right? They want support. Oh, I already read that. And developing community consciousness. Yeah, well, my community consciousness revolved around the Navy. So between the ages of 17 to 27, everything I knew, everything I knew before I joined the Navy was stripped from me. What little I knew, that was taken, and I was replaced with Seaman Recruit Bennet, or Seaman Apprentice Bennet, or Petty Officer Bennet. So those were the identities or the monikers I took on. That 17-year-old kid who was living in Salisbury, Maryland, didn't know what he didn't know. I see some questions up here. Just want to make sure.
No, we're doing good.
Nothing?
Just a lot of stuff in the chat. It's really,
okay.
really great. But again, if you have any questions that you would like us to get to, I know we're at 3:18, so it is breezing by. It's
we're doing good.
So,
we're doing good. Okay.
Great. Perfect.
All right. I should probably slow this down a little bit. All right. Continuing on, emotional cognitive expectations. So, previous activities have lost their appeal. Ain't that the dang truth? No longer was I interested in playing high school football, trying to buy a car, trying to impress a certain someone for their love, attention, and affection. I am on doing my own thing, getting ready to go to war for the first time at 18 years old. I did enjoy looking back on some of the things that I've done up to this point, but I was really looking forward to what was coming next, right? Always looking for recognition and bigger picture accomplishments. Yeah, for me, I just really wanted my family to acknowledge my identity and autonomy as someone who's doing things for themselves. So yeah, I think a lot of young people probably can identify with that. They feel as if they've reached their full stage of maturity. I don't know how many times you've heard this from 16, 17, 18-year-olds. They know everything. My daughter lets me know all the time at 16 that she knows everything. I'm pretty sure at 16, 17, 18, I knew everything too. I just forgotten it the older I get, right? I don't know. But yeah, as young people, we seem to think we got everything figured out. And intellectually, yes, we're making future plans, we're setting goals, and we're starting to make their own schedule and plans. But guess what? I never did any of that while I was in the Navy. Someone else set my own schedule. Someone else planned what I needed to do. Someone else planned my future plans. Only thing I can count on is the rank, the exams I needed to take to increase my rank. But whoever was in charge in the military, they were making sure they were identifying what my future plans are going to look like. They may have asked me what my long-term goals may have been, like, oh, one day I would like to be here, or I like to do this, or I like to be stationed here. No guarantee though. And then, yeah, as far as making my own schedules, plans in my personal life to a point, but always that was always in backdrop or in contrast to the needs of the Navy, needs of the ship, or needs of my command in that particular moment in time. So my time and my autonomy was never always my own. So we have a 17-year-old person who barely didn't know a whole lot of anything, joins the military. Their identity is pretty much scooped away, and now it's been reinstalled with whatever branch of service in MOS or job that you're doing has now been replaced. So you're doing your military thing, 4 years, you re-enlist, 8 years, 10 years, whatever you do. Let's make an assumption. Now that we get out of the military, this is where we're at. Okay, these are some of the milestones now. So now imagine this. In the military 10 years, I'm getting out, not by choice, because I have to, and I don't have any backup options. And now I'm stepping into this identity for the first time as a person of color at 27 years old. My only experience being a person of color has only been in the military. So I can tell you what racism looks like in the Navy. I can tell you what that looks like on certain bases and commands and places that I've been. I couldn't tell you what it looks like in the workplace. I couldn't tell you what microaggressions look like because I don't know what microaggressions were in the Navy. Someone they didn't like you, you're just gonna have it out. There was nothing micro about it. It was like macroaggressions in the Navy, right? I don't know what office politics looks like. I don't know what professional bias looks like. I'm not having these conversations, right? I don't know any of these things. I feel like I'm part of this civilian world, but I'm not really a part of that world at the same time. So let's take a look at emotional development for a typical quote unquote someone who's in middle adulthood, right? So we're talking about middle-aged folks. So think of someone who's maybe retiring, who did the 30 years, then got out, right? 40 years. So they're having to really figure out where they're at emotionally. Are they moving forward? Are they stagnated? Are they stuck? Right? Are they guiding or showing up for the next generation? Do they even know how to? If we look at cognitive development, some of our intellectual abilities start to decline. So now, as I'm looking for a new job, a new career, maybe going back to college, my intellectual and cognitive abilities may be starting to go to the decline, and I'm starting college at 30-something, 40-something years old. That's tough. That's going to show up, right? Things like crystallized intelligence and the acquired stored of information skills and strategies increases in middle adulthood. These day-to-day operations you got down, but fluid intelligence, ability to deal with new situations begins to decline. I used to be tech savvy till about 2009, 2010. Now I'm just like, honey, could you fix the thing? I don't know how to do the thing. I used to operate satellite systems. Like one eye open, I could do all this crazy stuff. Now I gotta like watch YouTube to set up my Wi-Fi router. My ability to do certain things are different. It hits different. Okay. Our priorities. So if we look in the violet or the purple on the right-hand side, at this time of life, you're starting to reassess your life's priorities. Are you working to live or are you living to work? So this is a period of time like 40 to 60 years old, right? So are you expanding personal and social involvement? Typically at this age, I'm close to 50 now. My social circle is getting much smaller. I don't need a whole lot of friends. I just need like 2 or 3 good ones, right? My responsibilities has definitely changed now. Now I'm stepping into a space where I have to learn a new job. I have to learn a new culture, and I'm a father or I'm a husband. I still got to show up with those responsibilities, but they've changed now. So now I got to figure it out and learn what those things look like, right? A decline of physical skills. Yeah. My knees right now, folks, sound like a bowl of Rice Krispies. Snap, crackle, and pop. Everything about me hurts. My whole body is changing. I have to step into this space and realize, oh my God, everything is changing. How do I feel about that? My identity. Let's bring it back to the identity piece, right? Balancing work and relationships. Well, that has a lot to do with my identity. Now, as a middle-aged African-American male, what does that mean in this day and age? How does my identity show up at my job now? I didn't know what I didn't know, and now I have to play catch up really quick. I have to understand how my identity is going to impact my employment. It could impact maybe even my safety, depending on who I am and where I am in this country. All right, moving on. So, topic of discussion here. So this is open to everyone. I'm curious, how many identities do we think a typical veteran may possess? And if someone wants to chat, because I could use a sip of water and talk a little bit.
Thank you, Ahmad. So you're asking, what are the different intersections? What are the different identities people
Correct.
can put in the chat? That, yeah, how do we do that? How many identities do people have? Excellent.
Mm-hmm. I'm just checking out the chat here. Mm. Mm. So Tim put in husband, father, survivor, friend. Yeah. Yep. That's what I'm seeing. Positionality includes so many things. I don't know how to answer this. Okay, Autumn, I'm gonna give you a second, but I appreciate you putting that in there. At least four. Danielle Rose says at least four identities. I'm gonna throw out there that there's hundreds of identities. We could talk about unit, branch of service. We could talk about gender, sexual orientation, spirituality, uh, geek culture, pop culture, right? Politically, we could talk about that. We could talk about cultural and racial identities, parental identities, partner identities. There's so many identities we have because guess what? As individuals, we're so many different things depending on the context. We could talk about student identities. If you're a student veteran, well, what does that identity mean, right? The answer is, whoops, went too fast. Sorry, let me go back. Get back here. Get back to these identities.
It's a cool graphic, though, Ahmad.
Right? Yeah, don't ask me how I set that up. I think one of my kids helped me with that. So there is no wrong answer. Basically, is the answer here. There are so many identities. When you look in the mirror, what do you see? That's your identity. It's what you want to declare that identity as. So when I got out and I had to find my identity, I realized there's a lot of parts to me that I just never took the time to be present and intentional with. I was a dad. Of course, on the outset, I'm a melanated person. So there's that identity. What does that mean in the Pacific Northwest? How does being a Black man in Everett, Washington, what does that mean? Being a dad in this space, what does that mean? So when I work with my clients, the reason why you see stormtroopers here and you see Star Trek stuff and you see game stuff here is not because I'm not professional. I'm very professional, but I'm working with a whole bunch of younger folks now, younger generations of veterans and individuals. So they may not understand what it felt like when I watched the Challenger explode in the 1980s. They may not get that, but we both know what a stormtrooper is. You picking up what I'm laying down? They may not be able to connect with me when I watched the Berlin Wall fall, and we're both veterans still, but we both know the importance of modern warfare and playing Call of Duty and why you want to charge your batteries on your controller. Basically, what I'm saying is explore all the different identities within yourself and in your client or the people that you're supporting so you can find opportunities to connect. That's why I have this kind of stuff there. So when I'm working with a new person for the first time and they see that and they're like, why do you have a stormtrooper? You like Star Wars? Like, yeah, I do. We have our conversation about Star Wars for a minute. And why do I think this is important? And I kind of let the air out of the bag here a little bit. Building rapport. Building rapport. I don't care if you're a provider, a clinician, a supporter, a spouse, whomever you are in this space of supporting veterans. Building rapport is so important. Establishing trust is so important. So if I'm almost, I'm a 46-year-old individual, my veteran is 22, 23. Well, generationally speaking, there might not be a lot of things where we can find common ground. Maybe we can, I don't know. But I'm going to find areas of things that they're interested in. So when you're working with your veterans, be mindful of what they're into. I'm listening. When I ran the vet center at Lake Washington, I was listening to what younger veterans were into. Because now I'm the old guy, right? I'm the old guy in the shop. I'm the old person. Fine. They would make jokes. I took it. I don't care. But I was also listening to what they were into. They're into video games. Oh, that's cool. I already like video games. So that was kind of an easy transition to step into. They like movies. They like watching certain sporting activities that I wasn't really knowledgeable on. So I started learning. Not in an effort to be sneaky or anything, but I'm building rapport. I want to be able to hold conversations with them about the things they're interested in. So maybe they might feel comfortable enough to talk to me about the things they're scared of. That makes sense? So when you're building rapport with anyone, be prepared. If you're working with a veteran, again, don't make them the expert for them to teach you about them. That makes sense? So if they're a person of color and you're not, don't put the onus of all that work to teach you about what it's like to be a person of color as a veteran on the veteran. Do your own homework. Show up. Doesn't mean you got to be the resident expert. Doesn't mean you got to know everything. Nobody can do all that. But just do a little something to say, hey, I know who you are. I see you. And this is what I know. And then whatever I don't know, I'm hoping you can help educate me and fill in the gaps, right? Listen without judgment. These are all therapeutical report things, by the way, for those who don't know. These are all therapeutical things, therapeutical rapport building items that I like to use. Listen without judgment. A lot of veterans are going to may feel very insecure. They may feel nervous. They may feel guilty of transgressions that they had to do in the military. So listen without judgment. We all have our own morals and values, but we should hold space. Again, this is about the person you're supporting. It's not about you. Holding space matters. Use disclosure with caution. Now, this is kind of a therapeutic thing. It's kind of taboo sometimes for therapists to talk about themselves, unless you're a study of like Carl Whitaker or Dr. Virginia Satir, like I am. I like to bring some of myself into session if it adds value and if it makes a point. Being vulnerable with anyone is hard to do, right? So when you're building these relationships, make sure you have space so you can be a little vulnerable and be okay with that, depending on the context. Right? Again, context is key here. So if it makes sense and it's safe, yeah, let them know who you are. When I'm working with veterans, they can see all my friggin' challenge coins back there. They know I'm a veteran, right? So that's my disclosure. Hey, I'm a vet too, right? Be aware of your limitations and knowledge and experience. As an associate therapist, I am always painfully aware of what I don't know because I get uncomfortable. So I'm very transparent in my sessions when I'm working with clients, and I hope you are too, in whatever capacity and context that you're working with veterans. If you don't know something, just say it. It's cool. I don't know what I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. And if your veteran is asking you a question where you got to look something up, tell them that. But if you're going to make an expectation or set an expectation with that veteran, it's best that you keep that expectation. You keep your word. I've heard 100 times in veterans going to college, they're trying to go to school. Well, so-and-so said they're going to call me back. They never call me back. And then they leave the school. Or such and such said they were going to do this, that, and the third, and they never got back to them. They end up leaving. So make sure you understand your limitations, how you get to show up, and when you get to show up when you're serving veterans. And empathy. Empathy is the ability to feel or share a space with someone, even though you didn't have that exact experience as they did. I've never been a member of the LGBTQ community, but I know what it feels like to be ignored. I've never been a woman, but I know what it feels like to be passed on opportunities. Trauma is an equal opportunity employer. So if you don't look like the person that's sitting in front of you, that's okay. We got to understand where their pain comes from. And maybe you can tap into that using your empathy to tap into whatever they're going through, so you can help strengthen that bond and that rapport and that connection. So that's something yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to apologize, to interrupt. Did have a question kind of related to this, but please finish your thought.
Nope, I'm done. I'm done. I can go. What's up?
Well, Eric put some stuff in the chat, and then Jessica had a question. What happens when you run into a roadblock with building rapport, like you just don't have any commonalities, or, there's just a wide gap between, your experience as a veteran with a long career or very complex career with someone who is not only not a veteran, but maybe much younger. I think there's probably lots of good thoughts you have on that. Just wanted to give you some time to.
Let me just digest Eric's question here for a second. Okay, that's fair. So maybe we could talk about combat from the state of, and so if you look at Eric's question, I'm just going to reread it for me, so I'll make sure I'm reframing in my mind. But one of the biggest challenges vets have with the VA mental health community, for example, I'm a 52-year-old man with 10 years of overseas service, including 5 combat deployments. How can a 26-year-old non-veteran who's never seen anything but the inside of a college classroom relate to me about my experiences? Great question. Maybe that 26-year-old can relate to what it feels like to be afraid, to be fearful. Maybe we could have conversations and build rapport around conversations about what it's like to show up for someone in one of the most stressful situations. You're right. Maybe that 26-year-old does not know what it feels like to deploy or have to get your sea bag or kit ready within 24 hours, or have to sign your page two to make sure your page two is updated because we're about to have some stuff. But maybe that 26-year-old grew up in a very traumatic family situation. This is opportunities where we can find where our experiences, like I said, intersect. Trauma is an equal opportunity employer. Maybe we can find out what if this 26-year-old feels comfortable talking about any of their traumatic experiences. Maybe that's what we do. To understand where we're coming through and how we can hold space. Maybe this 26-year-old will never understand what it's like to go to combat. They know what it's like to be away from home. They may know what it's like to be separated from your loved ones. They may know what it's like. Maybe they're a college student. How to give of yourself and your time and your energy for something, for a greater goal or greater good down the line, like graduating. It's not the same as going to combat, but it's showing up. That makes sense?
Yeah. Well, it does to me. I appreciate that. And then to Jessica's point, not as specific, but, do you have recommendations when maybe you just don't know where to go as the provider? You're thinking, not only, maybe I do have some commonalities, maybe I'm not thinking to share all of those, or maybe I'm not sure if that would even be useful. What happens when we're just right off the bat thinking, oh goodness, like how am I going to relate to someone who has had such a very different experience? What can we as providers do to try to reach out and bridge that chasm, which I'm sure is felt and seen and very well understood by the veteran seeking services? So yeah, any more thoughts on that?
Yeah. So that's where I like to fall back down to pop culture. When I find myself at a disconnect where I'm like, I'm really trying to connect to this person and I'm struggling to find out what's going to sink in, pop culture works, music works. The last 2 years, what shows did you binge watch on Netflix and Hulu and stuff like that? Maybe we can find connections on what we watch and what we like to enjoy, right? As providers, I am looking for anything that allows me to connect with you. And if I still feel that we're not having a rapport, that we're still not connecting, then it's my ethical responsibility to find you a clinician that can, if we're talking about mental health clinicians, right? If that's the context of the relationship. As a clinician, if I feel by that second, third session that this is not a good fit, I'm not a good therapist for this person. That happens. I've gotten fired before. It doesn't hurt my feelings anymore. I'm just not a good fit for you. And that's okay. Being honorable and saying, hey, let's talk about this thing. I don't know if I'm a good fit for you. What do you think? And say, okay, let me find someone that I can connect you with. But if that's not the situation, we're not talking about a mental health therapeutic relationship. You're just trying to, show up. Let me tell you, as the only person of color at a college that I worked at, one of the only people, I had to connect with my non-melanated veteran students with pop culture, music, movies, sometimes politics, but I was really careful. I had a lot of boundaries around that kind of stuff. I'm just trying to connect with other interests. There's so many things that we enjoy that we do as people. That's what I'm connect with. Are they like to exercise? Well, I used to like to exercise. Let's talk about that. I like to ride bikes. What do you do? So find areas of other things. If we can't connect on the intersectionality of individuality of who we are, find out what we do and what we like. Maybe you can get in that way. Hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, and just one follow-up, and then I know we want to get back to the rest of your slides. I think when you're talking about sharing information about us, but Rachel has a good point. We don't want the veteran or the person seeking care to then want to take care of us.
Yes.
So, that's meaningful, purposeful disclosure. That you could have a whole day of workshop on that, but I think that's, maybe thinking about, because you might be trying too hard. You might be trying in ways that aren't helpful, but that's why I don't know if this is appropriate, but I just sort of acknowledging the elephant in the room that, you may be wondering, like, how is someone like me potentially going to connect with you? And maybe we can talk about that. Like, do you have concerns? What are things that we might have in common we didn't even know? What would any of us want if we were seeking care and we just don't feel like maybe this is on the surface a great match, but we just don't really know?
I love, was it Rachel that said that? And they are so on point. Yes, you do not want to indirectly make your client manage and soothe your emotion. That's not their job. They're coming to you for help, not the other way around. I only do that and only say recommend doing that if it adds value, if it's short and sweet, if it shows that I've been there. So if a veteran says, when I was in Dubai, yada, 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 I was like, yeah, you know what? I was in Dubai 7, 8 times too. Did they still have, I don't know, Metropolitan Gardens or whatever, the US Met Club or whatever it was? That's an opportunity to build rapport. I try not to share anything too traumatic with me, with myself and working with clients. I kind of keep that stuff in house. I have my own therapeutic work on that stuff. But if it adds value, if it helps the client be seen, then sure, why not? But yeah, the great point. We do not want to make your client responsible for you. That's not why we're here.
Thank you for that
Yeah.
detour. I know people are appreciative of the conversation, but please feel free to continue. I'm sure we could go on all day.
Oh man, I got the whole class.
Oh man.
All right, so here's some common diagnoses that I see. Now, again, anything is up for a game, but this is what I see. This is what I write a lot of stuff for when I have to write my diagnoses after I do my intakes and score all my assessments, right? So post-traumatic stress disorder, I personally believe post-traumatic stress disorder, in my humble opinion, this is my opinion, I don't think it's a disorder. I think it's a completely natural progression of your brain trying to make sense of something that makes no sense. This is what you're going to do. So you're going to have symptomology of hypervigilance. You may have a hyper startled response. Veterans that are diagnosed with PTSD also have to think about what that means in society, right? That diagnosis. When you say, I have PTSD, what are the first things that you start thinking about? Oh my goodness, that veteran's a ticking time bomb. They're going to blow up any minute now. That's not necessarily true, right? So PTSD can have a comorbidity or additional other diagnoses such as anxiety, depression, typically kind of goes hand in hand with PTSD. Moving on to military sexual trauma, it's not just for women. Anyone can be a victim of military sexual trauma. I'm so happy to hear that the VA is providing specific resources for those that had that experience and resources for that experience. So military sexual trauma, one of the things that I like to when I start hearing language around sexual trauma, I'm immediately aware of my gender if I'm working with women or if I'm working with anyone that identifies as a woman. When I was working in person, not so much telemental health, but when I was working in person, I was very mindful of how I sat. I was very mindful of my body positioning. I'm not a small guy, so I made sure that I didn't appear as a threat, right? So I'm very mindful of my body language, my affect, how I'm presenting. So if you're dealing with anyone that you may suspect or has acknowledged that they have military sexual trauma or MST, just make sure you're also aware of your stance to them and making sure they're comfortable and explore hopefully what that is that makes them uncomfortable. Traumatic brain injuries. Traumatic brain injuries happen a lot in the military. We've heard a lot of stories with the NFL and football players with CTEs, concussion protocols, etc. Traumatic brain injuries can change the neurodevelopment of that individual. It's been known to change personalities. It's been known to affect the physiological aspects of the body in very many harmful ways. So just being aware of the symptomology of PTSD, there could be some cognitive barriers there when we start talking about going to school, going to college. When I was working at the college, one of my students got diagnosed with TBI. So I'm thinking of accommodations, right? Cognitive accommodations. How do I get to show up for that individual? I want to make sure, depending on your relationship and the context of the support services you're giving, just make sure you have accommodations available for anyone that's dealing with any of these items, right? And of course, substance use disorder. I can't say this enough. Substances and military service go hand in hand like peanut butter and jelly. I learned to do my best drinking in the Navy. I learned a lot of my bad habits in the Navy. Substances, there's a comorbid relationship with depression and substances, particularly alcohol is what I'm thinking about. So just be aware of what those substances can do to the brain, to the body, can affect employment, can affect getting access to certain benefits depending what state you live in, state benefits, mindful, even some jobs. So substances can get in the way. A lot of my veterans, they use substances to medicate how they feel. That's kind of a standard practice. So just being mindful of the relationship of the substances and the veteran can really help go a long way when you're working on diagnoses, when you're working on setting up a treatment plan or support services. So if you're working at a college and someone brings you some documentation that has any of these disorders or diagnoses, what are you going to do? What kind of accommodations do you think this person may need? For housing, if you're supporting the unhoused and these things come up, you find some paperwork or documentation. What does that mean for them in their housing situation? Those are the kind of things we want to start thinking about as providers, is how does my client's diagnosis, I'm pretty sure all of you are doing that anyway, but you want to make sure how your client's diagnosis is going to impact whatever work you're going to be doing, and to make sure that you have the supportive tools to show up for them. And that's an excellent segue to the next slide. My toolbox, yeah! What's in your veteran support toolbox? So that could be a myriad of things, again, depending on your role, position, and in your relationship with that veteran. So we talked about a lot of mental health stuff, right? So if you're a therapist, what would you want to put in your support toolbox? And I want to throw this out to people. So if you're a therapist and you're working with veterans, what would you put in your veteran support toolbox? If you're an operator of another type of veteran support service, what would you put in your toolbox from what we talked about today to support that veteran, he, she, or them? I want to take a look. Oh, I got a Q&A here. What is that? How do you find in-person veteran support groups? Oh, great. Great question. How do we find in-person veteran support groups? Well, there's several ways you can do that. If you're in the state of Washington, you can go to dva.wa.gov. And if you just go through the trees there, you'll find a lot of different veteran support groups. Traditional Google's a great way. Maybe your local community, depending on where you live at in the United States. I've seen a lot of links with VA healthcare, VHA, so the Veterans Health Administration has pages with links to other supportive services in the area. If you have a veteran service officer or veteran service office in your state, that's a great place to start. I know Washington State has several veteran service offices up and down I-5 and on I-90. So checking for veteran supportive services. Sometimes just doing a Google search, veterans housing, and your zip code might bring something up. And then there's a website that's like literally on the tip of my tongue. I'm just trying to, it's going to come to me at 2 o'clock this morning. I've watched. I'm going to remember it this morning at 2 a.m. But there's another website that I'll have to just send it back out to everybody that I just can't remember at the moment. But utilizing your veteran supportive services resources, start with the federal VA. Not every state has a state veterans administration. Washington State's one of the few states that actually has a state-run VA. So start with your federal VA, go state, and then of course county. Look in your county. Hopefully your county has a lot of connected veterans resources. I know after 9/11, and especially when OIF and OEF veterans started to return from Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a larger increase in county and state services. So that's where I would start. And let's see what we got in the toolbox. Okay, my big takeaway. All right.
And I just wanted to add, I threw some links in there, and we'll put this on our product page where the recording will be in the slides. But I was finding some different articles from the VA, CDC, and just wanted to make sure that people have heard of 988, I imagine by now, but wasn't clear if everyone had heard there is a veterans specific one where you can press 1 when you dial 988. And so I don't know if anyone's had experience with that, but that's what I've been hearing as well, that there's some specific supportive help in that regard.
So I was just thinking, I kind of threw that question out there for those that are still in the space. Depending from what role that you serve or work with veterans, I'm curious, what do you have in your toolbox currently? Maybe you could share with the rest of us, or what do you want to have? Does anybody have any ideas? I don't want to put anybody on blast. So EF, one of the biggest things in their toolbox for students is they're not alone. Yes. So no matter what perspective that we're talking about serving veterans, community, community, community. Let me say it again, community. Veterans thrive with a sense of community. That's where veterans can get into trouble because they can fall in, some veterans can fall into groups that may not be really helpful or supportive because they're all desperate for community. When I got out of the military, just trying to connect with a group of people that saw me and could acknowledge me was so important. So no matter what perspective that we're serving and we're working with vets, always making sure that they have a community that can plug into, a safe community that they can be seen and heard is always helpful. Ooh, I saw that, Tara. How can we best serve veterans while in jail? We are rural and lack resources. Ooh, that's a great one. So there's one program that it's called AVP, Alternatives to Violence. If you Google that, they do a great job in building community within jail and prison program systems. So just take a look at that. I'm gonna bring it back to my first point, community. I know in Pierce County, which is near Tacoma, Washington, I know they have a veterans unit, like a veterans jail block unit, where anyone that served or they have any idea that they had a DD 214, they were put on that block or in that unit. So creating programs. Yes, Bernice, WDVA has incarcerated veterans programs. Do what Bernice said. Check out dva.wa.gov and check out our incarcerated programs. And that's what I was just about to say. Is they create these systems where, whoops, not Diva. There we go. They create a jail system that is veteran only. So these veterans get to reestablish their own sense of chain of command and hierarchy and safety in community as well. So just for you clinicians in your toolboxes, what you want to have the ability to connect and build community. So if you're doing group therapy, cool, that's another option. You want to have, again, iconography that shows that you understand veterans. You want to hold space with veterans. You want to be transparent with veterans because they can sniff out BS quicker than anybody. And you just want to, if you don't know something, just say it. I don't know, or I'm unfamiliar with. Can you help me out? So those are some basic therapeutic tools that we can put in our toolbox. Any other questions or comments with the time we have left? Let me go back here.
Oh, here's one.
Mm-hmm.
What would your advice be for veterans that are quote unquote old school and have just only recently acknowledged they're depressed and or have experienced trauma or other things that they're challenged with?
Ooh, that's a good question. That is such a good question. I've worked with older veterans that have that I would consider my senior, out of respect. I would see a little older than me. You have to keep the mindset of what generation they come from. So anything I would say anything before 1980, people didn't talk about their feelings. Feels did not matter. So when someone starts to express a desire to reconnect with themselves, have safe and healthy boundaries. If that's the therapeutic boundaries, even the physical boundary, you want to make sure that they have a space to feel safe to be vulnerable with you, right? That old stuff, Christy, that's right. That old school stuff runs deep. You want to create a space where that person can be vulnerable, right? Then they're not going to be mocked or judged because, you know, they grew up with a mindset that if they show any kind of vulnerability, someone's going to come down on them. So you want to make sure you prove to them that you can be safe with them. There's safe boundaries here. Whatever's set here stays here, right? And part of that process, you want to develop expectations with that person. So 52-year-old, what are some expectations that you want to get out of this experience? Where are we trying to go? What are you trying to get to? Are you trying to educate yourself on all the isms of the world right now because that was never a thing for you back in the day? Are you trying to reconnect with certain family members? Like, what's the mission? What's the goal? What's the underlying reason why you're doing this work? So make sure we understand what that is. And then last but not least, using direct communication. Previous eras of veterans, their communication style may consist of I don't know, maybe, whatever. Learning to help that generation develop their ability to articulate what's happening for them is really crucial. And just taking your time and go slow. I hope that answers your question.
Well, what you just demonstrated makes me think my 13-year-old son could be a very good counselor because that's what he does. I don't know. Yeah, no, I'm sorry to make a joke there, but one last question. Finding new communities, does over-involvement sometimes link with high risk? I mean, I think it's a good question for probably any general population, but any thoughts on that if you've seen that?
Yeah, I think you got to strike that balance, right? You never want to work harder than the person that's coming to you for help. Number one, that's my I learned that doing social work. I never work harder than my client because I was like moving heaven and earth for something to show up for somebody, and then they never show up, right? So you want to have some personal boundaries on what that looks like for you in the context of the work that you do, and just creating healthy structure. And so you don't want to be showing up too much. You don't want your client showing up more than you. You want to find a balance. So is that 60-40, 70-30, 50-50? I don't know. That's going to depend between you and the person you're working with. But I would say at a bare minimum, you don't want to be working harder than they are. Let me see. Let me make sure I captured everything here.
Well, and maybe the question is about, people being so overscheduled, and that goes for non-veterans too. I mean, that's what's so funny is people are bringing up so many issues that are their specific veteran, I think, takes on this. And then there's just, everyone being overextended, maybe in general, and just kind of avoiding like dealing with who and what you're kind of dealing with now. So,
we want to be mindful of how much we're putting ourselves out there too. And doing too much is still a problem. Too much of anything is a problem. So just being mindful, making sure we're showing up. Oh, this is the one that's probably the golden nugget. Self-care, self-care, self-care. Making sure that we have a healthy work-life balance for not only ourselves as providers and clinicians, and making sure we're not doing too much. We want to, whatever that balance is, that's what I'm trying to figure out for myself. So I can't really talk about what that is. I'm still trying to find my own balance as being in private practice. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I am so sad. This went by so fast. I think a lot of people, have been sharing how much they liked it. Please do fill out the eval survey. We really appreciate your feedback. We actually read every comment. We really look forward to hearing what you say. And if you want more topics like this, I'm going to share my screen real quick just for some parting words. So your feedback is important. We've already put that into the chat. You brought up intersectionality and a couple of events coming up in December. Really wonderful colleague at Harborview Medical Center about when race and racism, it's the elephant in the room. And I think I used that phrase earlier today. And then Do You See Me? Moving from Intolerance to Acceptance. She's a fantastic speaker and really covers some of this in a real, real talk kind of way, as people were sort of saying earlier. But Ahmad, I mostly just want to thank you so much for spending time here. I want to thank everybody who was here today. Just really, it's long overdue that we had these kind of topics, and I'm so glad that Gabriel knows you and found you and brought us into our MHTTC family. I really look forward to another chance to have you here.
I really just want to say I'm honored and I appreciate everyone's time and attention. And thank you so much for just being present and listening to me ramble. Thank you.
You're in good company. You're in good company. We also, we have a podcast, and I'm not saying that just because I happen to be on it, but we recorded a session before the webinar. We're really trying to just offer little nuggets, however people want to learn. And so that'll be hopefully produced in the next couple weeks, as well as the recording of this and the slides. But thank you, everybody. Thank you for sharing your experiences. I know we didn't talk about this, that, just talking about these things can be really true. You're sharing your medical discharge, like that's you're just putting yourself out there, and not all of us are called peer counselors, but a lot of us have been through different things, and you sharing your story is really powerful, as well as everybody here. So thank you, everybody, and we'll hope to see you next time. I know we'll leave this open so people can grab links in the chats, but thank you, Ahmad, and thank you, Gabriel, for making this happen. Thanks for everybody who's here today.
Thank you. And to everyone that served, enjoy your Veterans Day. I hope you get that time off. And yeah, I hope to connect with anyone You can find me on the interwebs. I'm on LinkedIn for sure, or you can find me at crossroadfamilytherapyservices.com. That's my website. But I really want to say thank you, and I hope everyone has a great, wonderful weekend or week and
Thank you.
weekend.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.